It's the Pacers, it's the Knicks, it's the Hicks versus Knicks rivalry after they met on a huge stage, their first game back on ESPN. Gavin Schall from Locked On Knicks and I have so much to catch up on these teams and preview a huge matchup on today's Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What up, y'all? Happy Thursday/Friday, and welcome into another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today, this one's coming out a little early because I wanted to breathe for a full day before the game. We're talking all things Pacers. Knicks, can't wait. It's going to be awesome after the heated 7-game series they had last year. Pacers back in the Garden where they set playoff records to end that series last year. Tonight, it's going to be so epic on ESPN. First national TV game for the Pacers this year. New look Knicks, who are banged up. And here come the Pacers trying to beat them once again. It's going to be fantastic. And Gavin Schall from Locked On Knicks is going to join me to preview it all. We recorded this a little too early in the day to know the official James Wiseman injury prognosis. There's a chance that when this is out, you already know it. So apologies that I'm not covering that today because that is major news. So I will do a podcast after the Knicks game talking about that, the Wiseman part, and the Knicks game specifically. So apologies for that, but really good conversation here. Talking Pacers, talking Knicks with Gavin Schall. Let's do it.
All right, guys, as promised, lucky enough to be joined by the fantastic host of the Locked On Pacers podcast, Tony East. Tony, I very intentionally did not give you the opportunity last year to come on and gloat after that 7-game battle royale we went through. Now's your time, man. Anything you've been waiting all summer to say to Knicks fans?
Well, the Knicks rightly got to watch the Pacers get swept in the very next round, so there wasn't a lot of time to turn around and say anything. So one magical night in the Garden for the Pacers, certainly. It was very fun to experience that in person, but the Knicks responded in a different way than the Pacers did to the playoffs last year. So this year will definitely, I believe that will turn into a rivalry, and it will certainly evolve after the many moves the Knicks made.
Look, the good news for Indiana is I have no right to talk trash about getting swept by the Celtics after what happened night one. You guys were close. You guys were in all those games, even though you were injured. So I have no room to say anything there. But yeah, very, very different off seasons. What's new with Indiana? And like, I guess like what were your expectations for this year's team? Is Indiana, like the way they were viewed, the way they were talked about was so fascinating because you make the conference finals and it feels like everyone was so quick to go, all right, this is the same as Atlanta. And I think it was 2021 or 2020 when they made that run. And like, of course, Milwaukee's going to be better. Of course, the Knicks are going to be better. Of course, Philly's going to be better. Orlando might even jump them. And if I were a Pacers guy, if I was hosting Locked On Pacers, I'd come out and be like, this is effing disrespectful. You are not allowed to say that. We just made this run. We're super young. Everyone's back. Like, what are your expectations for this team? And like, how's it looked so far through preseason and a single game?
Yeah, that's why I think their summer looks so much different than everybody else's is because they're so young, right? So like when you make the conference finals as a young team, sure, you always want to get better, but like why, right? Like figure out what this group really is. Can they do this again without adding another talent? And then they'd have all their picks going forward and the team that just made the conference finals. And you know, it's very reasonable to expect that some, if not all of their young players from last year will get better. And they didn't have Ben Mathurin or Jarris Walker basically for any of the postseason. So it's very easy for them to point and say, hey, this team that just was really good can be better without doing anything, right? So you ask what's new? Well, like the only new player would have been James Wiseman, but he got hurt very badly in their opener against Detroit. I doubt he'll even play in New York. So like, Knicks fans could see the literal exact same team that
I'm gonna have a nightmare.
Last year.
It's not good.
Yeah, Ben Mathurin will be in the rotation. He was very good. In fact, he saved them in their season opener from a loss to the Pistons. He was awesome in the fourth quarter. That will be different, and he's good. He's played well against the Knicks before. You know, Knicks fans obviously know who he is. But in general, very similar team, and they're very fortunate that they're in a position where they're young and can do that because. You know, if they had lost that series, they would have had to consider doing what Milwaukee, Philly, New York, you know, get new pieces, do the next steps, but they didn't have to. And now we get to see that. I'm so excited. Like games like this that just have the first Bucks Pacers game will be like this, right? The first Knicks Sixers game will be like this. That just surge of emotion from what could have been elimination last year, especially with the Game 7. Everybody will just be so hyped up. But the Knicks, extra so. It's going to be awesome.
So I was trying to foist that disrespect narrative onto you. Are you buying into that, or do you think Indiana was like kind of like appropriately perceived? I'll say coming into the year.
Yeah, because Anunoby got hurt during the series, obviously, and that was on top of what they were already dealing with. And Giannis missed the first round. I think the Pacers, especially given we saw in the regular season, could have beat the Bucks anyway. Mm-hmm. But the Knicks series, they were down 2-0 before injuries kept. We even talked about the war of attrition before the series, and then again during it, right? Like, yeah, I think that I don't think they feel it. I think they feel like a little bit of, it's interesting how many teams had good seasons last year, but have like actual ammo of disrespect that they can use as fuel this year. And the Pacers do feel that to some extent, right? Like nobody believes in what they did last year. And, their star player was just on the Olympic team and played in 3 games the whole Olympics, right? Like they have all these motivators as well, but also at the same time, like they made the playoffs on the last day of the season. Like they understand that what actually happened in the postseason at the same time. So they do have the disrespect narrative going for them. Certainly, I think they will carry that into the Garden, but the Knicks probably also have that to some extent, right? They lost in the second round, and lots of teams do. And the Celtics somehow have motivation. They won 60-something games and won a championship, and their 2 best players are like, F you guys. So I don't know how the NBA set this up where every team that had good seasons has motivation, including the Pacers, but that's the case. And yeah, they have earned that right to feel that way, though. Like no one came into this season and said, oh, the Pacers for sure are a top 2 or 3 team in the East. Like everybody had penciled them in even to somewhere in that 4 through 8 range. And so they've got something to prove. And this is the first good team they're playing this year, and one that they played, let's say, some emotional games against last year.
Yeah, I do think there's something to the idea that like a team derives its personality from their leader, and you would know this so much better than I would. But I think Tyrese Haliburton, he's about fun, he's about love, and that's not to say that he's like isn't a competitive killer, because he is. But like that is almost like not what makes that team special, right? It's like it's how much joy they play with, how free they play, and the Knicks kind of is like a team that's like a little bit has some of that, but was a little more tightly wound coming from their head coach and their best player. Like certainly got to experience that firsthand.
Well, that's what I was going to say. Is like Brunson's pretty similar. Like I feel like in general the team dynamic is similar, but it's funny because Tibbs and Carlisle are perceived similarly, but I feel like Tibbs kind of changes the Knicks feeling just a little bit compared to the way the Pacers are perceived, because they do have these fun-loving stud point guards who are really good at uniting a full roster and setting a style, right? The Knicks are who they are because Jalen Brunson can play the way he does. The Pacers are who they are because Tyrese Haliburton can play the way he does. And they both had wonderful seasons last year, but they're slightly different team dynamics because of their coaching. In some ways, I think their fan bases, right? The Knicks expectation is kind of this like tough team, and it was like perfect last year. And the Pacers were like that for a long time with the way they had defensive teams, but all of a sudden the fan base has really embraced this like, oh, this is the best offense ever. Cool. We can watch that. That's fun. So it is a little
tolerate it. Yeah. I guess I want to know about the other side of the ball a little bit, because I mean, you just heard it like all throughout the first half of last year. If Indiana can be anything but the worst defense in the NBA, they're cooking. They did that in the playoffs. They didn't look like the worst defense to me. Myles Turner was incredibly impactful. Obviously, Pascal Siakam made a difference. Andrew Nembhard getting more minutes was excellent. I'm sure it's something you spend all offseason talking about. What are expectations on that end of the floor this year? What do you think the ceiling is that Indiana can hit on defense?
They say, and they're right, that, hey, after the All-Star break, we were 18th. Like, look, we did some stuff. We got Siakam. We traded away Buddy Hield. We could defend a little bit. I don't think they can get to that high again, but they're better than the worst, right? They're like passable and credible. Opening night, they were 10th. They're 10th right now as we're talking. They played the Pistons, and I think the Pistons will not be a joke this year. But they did like show signs of life on defense in the opener. Their preseason games, they did not. So I think they're right to say that they can be better defensively this year. Their personnel suggests they shouldn't have been as bad as they were last year. So I think they will be at least passable. How passable they are will kind of define how good of a team they truly are. Because you said it, right? Like Nembhard can guard. Nesmith is like putting him on Brunson kind of changes the series in some ways. Game 3 especially, that was important because that was the last close game that the Knicks won that game. They would have won the series, obviously. And that was, so early on, and that adjustment was huge. Haliburton defended well against Detroit. I don't think that will happen every night, but it did happen in that game. Like, they have good defensive players on their team. They just were bad on defense. They got beat on drives. Their choices of shots they were willing to give up early in the season were strange. So I think they'll be like higher in the bottom 10 as opposed to like the worst defense in the NBA this year, which is huge because that's when their offense is as good as it is. That's all it takes to have a margin of, going from, oh, this is a spunky team to like, oh, geez, they're beating everybody. So that will matter against the Knicks too, who are trying to be top 10 in both, top 5 in both categories.
I was going to say, based on opening night, we're creeping closer and closer to the Indiana model of early last year. But we'll see if the Knicks.
That's so surprising.
Yeah, it might have just. It might have just been a game one thing, but hopefully they can get it together. But it did not look good game one. How about we talk about that in just a sec on both Locked On Knicks and Locked On Pacers.
Everybody, we have to tell you about the great folks over at PrizePicks. They are the best way to play real money sports action. Over 10 million members, billions of dollars in awarded winnings. PrizePicks has made daily fantasy sports accessible to all. You just pick more than or less than on 2 players for a shot to win up to 100 times your cash and run your game all season long with PrizePicks. You can win 100 times your money with as little as 4 correct picks. And it's the best place to get real money sports action and join the 10 million users every single day. Sign up today and get $50 instantly when you play $5. You don't need to win to receive that $50 bonus. It's guaranteed. PrizePicks offers weekly promotions as well. For example, if you think Justin Jefferson will get more than 83 and a half yards this week, or Christian McCaffrey when he comes back, is he going to run for more than 75 and a half yards? Well, cook up some hot takes with your friends and win real money on PrizePicks. Run your game, make your selections, and have some fun. Download the app today and use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly after you play your first $5 lineup. Again, that's use the code LOCKEDONNBA to get $50 instantly on PrizePicks after you play your first $5 lineup. PrizePicks, run your game.
All right, we are back on Locked On Knicks, Locked On Pacers. We talked a lot about the Pacers. Tony, what do you want to know about the Knicks?
Yeah, I liked their. Okay, so first of all, I have a take on the Knicks. I think they're going to be really good, obviously. They got good players. I wish they just made one of the big trades, just because it would have been cool to see what last year's team was with the adding either Towns or Bridges. Now it just feels so different, and I still think they'll be awesome. That starting five's insane. Do you think they can reach last year's defensive heights? Because it feels like Anunoby plus Bridges plus Tibbs system plus really good rebounding should be awesome. And yet maybe it's just because the Celtics are just like, what the heck was that? Like, that was the best offensive game of all time. But like the way when Cat dropped deep, like they couldn't stop anything. They were giving up the easiest shot ever every possession. And yeah, they're really banged up. But when they didn't have when they didn't have both Anunoby and Bridges on there, it's just like, oh, this will be a pretty good defense. Maybe it's just one night against the Celtics. Like, I'm really confident the Knicks will be awesome on offense. Like, they were shooting 60% through 3 quarters against Boston, but I'm not as confident in their defense. Am I overreacting to one game? Do you feel like they can be top 10 on both ends? Because that kind of feels like the theory of this team.
I think they can be top 10 on both ends. I don't think they have the ceiling that they did last year defensively. There's just, despite adding Mikal Bridges, a guy who's 3-4 years removed from finishing second in the league in defensive player of the year voting, it's just really difficult to replace Isaiah Hartenstein with 30 minutes of Karl Anthony Towns and become a better defense. Hartenstein had just become that good of a defender. Plenty of advanced metrics out there that painted him as a top 5 to 10 defender in the league, which if you watch that Pacers series is probably a little rich for your blood because the Knicks didn't look as good defensively in that series. Some of it was, again, Indiana being all-time offense. Some of it was the Knicks being tired, and some of it was like some flaws that were exposable, like against the playoff defense. But the fundamental issue there is there are now like two target points, right? Like Brunson and Cat instead of just one. Boston exploited the fact that the Knicks didn't want to switch with either of those guys over and over and over again. I think there are some elements of it being night one and just being a freak occurrence, and that it was literally the most threes ever made. And as I said in our recap pod, that is inherently, given there have been thousands of NBA games and maybe like hundreds of them have featured incredible shooting teams. And this is the first time that's happened. It's inherently anomalous to some extent. That being said, like the Knicks did everything wrong. They tried everything. They blitzed, they hedged, they switched, and none of it worked because the Celtics executed perfectly. And the Knicks, a team that was, to your point, on keeping some of the team together, thrown together 2 weeks ago, just was not playing on a string. And like a lot of times, even Brunson and Hart had multiple plays where one of them thought they were doing one thing, one of them thought they were hedging, the other one thought they were switching, and Boston got an open three. And I think Boston is kind of uniquely equipped to take advantage of those things. I think a lot of teams and a lot of smart offenses, and Rick Carlisle and the Pacers certainly qualify, are going to find ways to punish Karl Anthony Towns. And the Knicks, I think for now, I would hope Tom Thibodeau would simplify things a little bit, have a little bit more conviction in going with kind of one style of play. And you hope the premise of this team being a top 10 defense is that your two stud wing defenders that everyone in the league wanted, right? Anunoby and Bridges, play like it, fight through screens, rear view contests, and allow you to play some form of a drop that Tibbs clearly prefers.
Yeah, that because people were panicking. Oh, this is going to ruin the NBA. The Celtics can get up a billion threes and make a bunch. I'm like, it's just because of how the Knicks are playing. Like, it's just if Cat drops back that far, they could just get threes up every possession. And once they're more connected, it won't happen again, I don't think. Right. So I think they should be better than that. But the theory of both trades was that they get better on both ends. And of course, once they have their full team and aren't just like 5 good players and then Deuce McBride and we'll see.
Mostly it.
We'll see if
it's mostly it for now. Pacom Dadier, if you like him. Yeah.
Hey, he looked all right. To his credit,
he's good for a 19-year-old, but he's a 19-year-old. Yeah.
In the draft, I asked a bunch of draft friends like if Kolek was any good, and they were all like, no. And then every time I've watched Kolek play, I'm like, this kid's very good. Like this
Kolek's really good. Kolek's really he's I don't know if Phil, like I was saying, if you played him for 32 minutes, you probably would see performances like that Boston game every single game against the Knicks, but he would be top 5 in the NBA in assists while you give up 150 points a game. So I have some hope for him, but
I forget which Knicks summer league game I ended up at in Vegas, but I was like, okay, this is because I was watching Jacob Toppin because Obi was there.
Sure.
This kid looks good. And Campaign looked good too, so I get why it's gonna be hard to get the minutes. But yeah, the theory of the Knicks being better on both ends hasn't happened yet. I think it will, though. The other question that's obvious about the Knicks is: are you actually like full strength Knicks? Are you worried about their depth? Because it feels like they have 8 guys, right? That are legit real. And if they're all 8 healthy and clicking, they will be an awesome, awesome, awesome team. Do you think that's enough? Because last year, that was exactly the problem they had against the Pacers was they ran out of bodies. And you can say in some cases it was freak injuries. In other cases, you could say they were really stringing these guys as far as they could possibly go.
Yeah, I think what they do with Mitchell Robinson is going to be telling. It seems like consensus for most people right now is that they're going to try to trade him for 2 pieces or maybe try to find a way, even though they have very limited assets at this point, to turn him into a better player, which I would kind of say good luck, but some people think they can do it. If they hold on to Mitch, it's an interesting move because against, I think I'd say maybe 5 or 6 of the teams you'd see. I'm going to say six teams you'd see in the playoffs. I think Mitchell Robinson is incredibly helpful and incredibly useful. And like the biggest thing I think you were getting at with like the Knicks only making one of those trades is like, did they totally give up that like toughness, rebounding, bully ball identity that kind of obliterated the Sixers and looked really good those first 2 games against the Pacers? I think Mitchell Robinson is a one-man like identity and he's probably like the worst player in the NBA that can so single-handedly define a team's identity because he's the best offensive rebounder in the sport, one of the better rim protectors in the sport. But against Indiana and Boston, like he struggles against stretch 5. So to me, that's the curiosity. I think Precious Achiuwa, that was like a little bit outside of New York, an underrated story that he hurt his hamstring right before the season started because I think Tom Thibodeau was going to be really reliant on him and his ability to come in for Cat and actually play like as a switchable 5, someone who could really change the course of their defense. They could definitely use another wing. And I don't think it's going to be Pacom Dadier this year. I wonder if when Kevin McCullough Jr. gets healthy, another rookie, he could potentially be helpful. Maybe they re-sign Landry Shamet, but I kind of struggle to see a world where the Knicks don't try to add a wing at the deadline.
They had the answer. They had ex-Pacer TJ Warren in the house. I thought he was going to make it. I like TJ.
I love, dude. I've talked about it in our pod, but I 10 years ago in college, I was writing draft profiles about TJ Warren for the Suns, and then they drafted him, and he's one of my favorite players. I wish his career went differently, but it would be. He can still hit shots. He is just very slow.
I was going to say if he had enough burst, I was hopeful when. Not that I hoped anyone got hurt, but when Shamet got hurt, I was hopeful that he could make a team because that was very exciting. I like TJ Warren a fair bit. I want to talk a little bit specifics of this matchup. Do you feel like the new look Knicks are better equipped to play the Pacers? Because you mentioned they have 2 poking points now, but the theory is, and we saw it, I think people are way too low on how the Knicks played against the Celtics. Like they were shooting 60% and down 30 points at one point. It was like insane. Do you feel like that having 2 poking points will make them less equipped to play the Pacers, or do you feel like they're better off in this matchup? And I get that they're limited right now.
It's a great question because I think this is a gaudy answer for a team that got blown out in Game 7. But I think in a series setting, I would have been fairly confident either way. In like if we had gotten the fully healthy version of last year's Knicks with Hartenstein, with Randall, I actually think that's the version of the Knicks that I would say is most equipped to beat this Indiana team, just because I think there's enough depth. There's so much rebounding, so much physicality. I think they could kind of poke Indiana where they're at their weakest. And obviously Indiana was like a tough team and was a solid rebounding team by the end, but I think the Knicks might have just had a little bit too much. I certainly think this version of the Knicks is better equipped than like the dying one we saw in the playoffs last year. I don't say that word lightly. They were dying before our eyes, like withering and turning black and just like fading away. I think they can score with Indiana, and I think that Pacers series, like you asked, like why did they make both those moves? I think that Indiana series opened their eyes in terms of like, we need to get more switchable. Let's bring in someone like Mikal Bridges. We need to have more firepower. Let's bring in Karl Anthony Towns, because I think they kind of felt, which is maybe the premise of this Indiana team, like offense just matters substantially more than defense. And ideally you have both, and to win a championship, you need both to some extent, but offense is just fundamentally more important at the end of the day. So I don't know if I'm quite answering the question, but I would say slightly more so than the version we saw, because I think they can score with Indiana now.
I agree with you, because the theory of the Knicks being this incredible defense that actually could slow the Pacers, it kind of was there. I mean, to be clear, the Knicks were up 2-0, but games 1 and 2 were pretty dang close, like down to the wire kind of games. But they could not stop the Pacers at all. So if you can't, like nobody could in the playoffs last year. The Celtics couldn't. Joe Mazzulla has gone on the record on Locked On Celtics, by the way. I'm going to plug that again.
Shout out.
And said that was our hardest series. The Pacers was our hardest series, right? Like nobody could stop them in the playoffs last year. If you can't stop them, just go the other way, right? Try to score in an extent that they can't keep up with, because their defense was pretty flimsy. 13th in the postseason, I believe, in defensive rating of all the teams. And so that's where the Towns acquisition made a ton of sense to me, is like, okay, now, well, great. We can, every possession we have, 6 ways of slicing you up and scoring. And like, they already struggled with Hartenstein, right? You were talking about that all series. You were all over that in a way that nobody else was
Thanks.
That Hartenstein and the floater and that shot was just, that shot needs to have a name, by the way, because no one shoots it like that in the league. Just tore apart the Pacers. And now they have that to like the umptillionth power of the best shooting / maybe scoring big in the league. So I think that does make this matchup a little tougher for the Pacers when they're fully healthy and can like play a rotation that makes sense. Now, they're not fully healthy right now, which is going to make this a little different. But in general, I think that this will be a tougher matchup for the Pacers this series.
Yeah, so let's get into some more matchup specifics, maybe some closing notes on how excited we are next on Locked On Pacers and Locked On Knicks. First, we want to tell you about our friends over at FanDuel. Hey, NFL and NBA fans, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, you like play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. I don't know about you, Tony. I'm constantly getting that itch and just saying, like, I had it unfortunately with Knicks Celtics. Like once those first 3 threes went in, I was like, oh, what's the Boston money line? Because it's so clear that this is just going to be an avalanche. But you can also bet before the game. Either way, you'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. I'm going to go over to the NFL because I've been hot. I've 4 of my last 5 that I've recommended on Locked On Knicks have worked out for people if they were stupid enough to listen to me. I'm going to go Vikings over Rams. No, you know what? That game will be played by the time you hear this. Let's go Cardinals over Dolphins. Dolphins 3.5-point favorites. I don't really think the Tua experience is going to be 100% fine-tuned and perfect just yet. The Cardinals are a weird team. Their quarterback doesn't play well. They still win. So I'm going to take the Cardinals there. Again, if you want to put down $5 on your first bet to get started with $200 in bonus bets, that is FanDuel.com. Alrighty, let's talk some specifics, because it was just like, if you are just like I guess kind of like a basketball weirdo, a JJ Redick-esque lunatic, you appreciated some of the nuances of that Knicks Pacers series. And I think if anything, it's gotten even more interesting this year now that there's like less stylistic contrast with these two teams. I know sometimes it goes the opposite, but I think it'll make for harder choices defensively for both coaches. I kind of want to start out with how the Knicks are going to attack the Pacers. Last year, we saw Indiana do a bunch of different stuff to try to keep Myles Turner near the rim. Obviously, it gets a little bit harder this year with Karl-Anthony Towns. Do you think Indiana approaches this kind of similarly to how Boston did, where they put Al Horford on Josh Hart and just kind of said, like, hey, man, if you're afraid to shoot, like, we're going to treat you like a big and let Horford, like, rotate over, help in the paint whenever Towns was trying to drive on Drew Holiday? Because if I were Rick Carlisle, that's probably how I would start. I'd put Siakam on Cat, Turner on Hart, and just kind of see what happens and see if Josh Hart is willing to fire some threes. And if he is, that's kind of a win for teams because the Knicks offense seems to be, even again, to your point, on an off night, they were really efficient and really good. And like any other team shooting any other way are probably in that basketball game.
Yeah, I think that's what they should do. In the postseason, I would expect something like that. In the grind of the day-to-day regular season, can we cross-match our butts off the whole game? Maybe not. Like opening night was a little different, I suppose. But that makes the most sense to me. I mean, a big standout part of the Knicks Pacers series was anyone guarding their position at all? Like on either team? It was so crazy how that all went out and how that affected the transition play of the game. But yes, I think the Pacers should be doing something like that. Like Drew Holiday on Cat was surprising because that's a big height difference, even though the Celtics get away with that all the time. Whereas Siakam on Cat is like closer and Turner on Hart makes sense. We even talked about that potentially happening, last year during the series. So that does make sense to me. And then one of Nembhard, Nesmith on Brunson and Haliburton on whichever they view of Anunoby and Bridges as less threatening. That's probably the part that they'll be the least excited about, but neither of those two showed a ton off the dribble. Bridges was good in the second half. So maybe I'd put in Haliburton on Anunoby, but it's hard. You're going to give up something somewhere. But yes, I think the key part of the Cat part, I would guard the way the Celtics did.
All right. And then I guess other side of the ball, and I guess before I move on, you make a great point. I'm curious to see who Haliburton would guard. And I think that was it. The Knicks did an interesting thing this summer in that they have 2 weak points to attack, but they give defenses like, unless you want to call, I think, is it possible? You could put Haliburton on Josh Hart, but then you lose the ability to like do that with your center. So that's sort of interesting because if there's a quote unquote weak point, it is hard. And like some people are advocating for Deuce to start, so you get rid of that. But that's sort of a fascinating inflection point. I guess other side of the ball, obviously Indiana, they had a lot of success last year. Do you think their approach changes at all with Cat out there? Like, is there going to be more specific targeting, or is it just kind of like continue to play with pace, continue to be free flowing, move the basketball, and like not really doing all that much mismatch hunting relative to a team like Boston?
You expect Cat to guard Turner?
I think they'll probably start that way. That would just because he's not a great rim protector, and Anunoby's kind of your better rim protector anyways. It would make sense to me, but
I agree. So if that's the case, I think Myles Turner is going to set a bunch of screens in this game. That saved them against the Pistons in the second half. Was like they couldn't get anything going, and all of a sudden they were like, "Let's make Jalen Duren guard way out here." And then Myles Turner had 16 points in a quarter, and they were right back in the game. So I expect that will be part of it. And whoever Brunson is guarding will get lots of ball handling reps. Aaron Nesmith, get ready. But this is where something that we didn't get to talk about a lot last year in the Knicks series is going to be interesting. They closed with at the 3 against the Pistons was Ben Mathurin at the 3. And if Mathurin's the guy that they can't put Brunson on him, right? They'd probably switch him to Nembhard in that case. But either way, having Mathurin back does make it harder to hide Brunson. So I think there's going to be a lot of, hey, Carl, whoever you're guarding is coming over to set a screen, make it happen, because they want to keep OG and Mikal, presumably, as far out of the action as possible. Sure, that might mean that Tyrese Haliburton's getting less ball handling reps, but they have other ways to mitigate that, I think, as the Pacers, which is just another layer that makes this so much fun. Like, this is an awesome matchup this year.
Yeah, there's been like a lot of film work done. Shout out to Benji Ritholtz, Jonathan Macri over at Knicks Film School on that Knicks Celtics games. And one of the sins coming out of it clearly was that the Knicks were over helping, and they were so scared of Towns, Towns more so. A few times they left Brunson on an island against Jaylen Brown with kind of mixed results, as you would expect. But with Towns, like, they were just petrified every time he got switched. And I'm kind of hoping that the Knicks are a little bit more okay this time around, like leaving Towns on an island. And it's so dangerous with Haliburton because he's just on like 3 levels above as a passer compared to anyone on the Celtics, even though Jason Tatum, to his credit, shredded the Knicks in that game. So I'm wondering how willing the Knicks are to do that. And then when Towns inevitably gets beat and Anunoby rotates over, like, can the Knicks play in rotation well enough? In Indiana, just like Boston, they're so selfless, so much shooting across the board, they're able to punish you for that. I just wonder if they're able to punish you a little bit less with like a couple guys like Nembhard, like Siakam, who you're like, I don't love him shooting an open three. It is not quite the like 5-alarm fire it was literally anyone in the Celtics starting lineup shooting a three. And also just put some weight on OG Anunoby to say like, hey, we paid $200 million for this guy because he is the best in the NBA at helping at the rim and then somehow recovering to the corner and or Xing out if someone rotates over for him, and just trusting him to do that. Because to me, that is more optimal than giving up and basically like an early shot clock, like walk into a type of three, like make Indiana swing it around, like make them beat the rotation. And like the Knicks have to play with more focus. They have to play with more effort. They have to make less mistakes. They have to triple over themselves a little bit less. But to me, that is probably the better philosophy there.
I think so too. If I could name 2 X factors, and then I'll be curious what you think of this. One would be, I assume Andrew Nembhard, but whichever Pacers starting ball handler is not guarded by Bridges and Anunoby, that player is going to have to initiate a lot. The Pacers did have more balance in who handled it between that Haliburton, Siakam, Nembhard trio in one of their preseason games, and then again against the Pistons. I'd imagine it will be Anunoby on Haliburton and Bridges on Siakam, or maybe flip that. But that means Andrew Nembhard, go do stuff, make it happen, show what you did against the Celtics in the postseason if you can, because that would be huge. And if Cat dominates the glass, Turner had a really rough rebounding first half against the Pistons, and the Pacers just couldn't keep up, couldn't get on a run, couldn't get enough possessions. That will be huge in this game to me. So obviously Towns is important for a million reasons, but specifically if he rebounds well, I think that will be huge for the Knicks.
Yeah, and he looked great. Like that was the biggest disappointment against Boston. Cat looked great rebounding in the preseason. Like that was clearly like Tom Thibodeau like lighting a fire under him. And because when he was under Tibbs in Minnesota, Cat was one of the best defensive rebounding bigs in the league. You can pull up the cleaning the glass number, like consistently early in his career, playing center, 90th plus percentile as a rebounder. And then against Boston, that went away, and the Knicks gave up 1 million offensive rebounds. And Indiana fans watching, Sixers fans watching were probably giggling in joy as the Knicks got a taste of their own medicine, because that was miserable. And I'm hoping that can be a little bit better. I'm wondering, to like your point on the matchups, like if like they try to put Brunson on like Nesmith maybe, because I remember that a little bit from the playoffs last year. And I kind of liked like Derek, and sometimes Nesmith got the better of him. Sometimes Brunson, who can like, he's like a little mini James Harden, that like he's obviously not a good defender and he's like super short arms, and he is super short, but he's stout and tough and smart. And like he has some of that, like when teams go at him over and over again, he can kind of pick up on it a little, and like it kind of forces teams out of their offense a little bit. So that could be a curveball. But yeah, I'm excited. You're going to be there. What do you think the environment's going to be like? Just to wrap up on, one more basketball point before we get to that.
I won't be there actually. Yeah. I
unfortunately
will not be this time.
Okay, well, you'll be watching.
Yeah. I wanted to see Dante against the Pacers after that series, so I have a little bit about that. Every game he picked some guy that's his beef target today. McConnell once, Turner once. It's not happening. I'm sad. Isaiah Jackson once.
Yeah, I miss the fire. I'm hoping Josh Hart's been kind of pissy the last few days. He's been responding to people on Twitter. He said it was ridiculous to question Mikal Bridges, clearly at least for one half broken jump shots. So maybe it's Josh Hart picking a fight this time around, but we will see. Tony, before I let you go, can you let Knicks fans know where they can find all your great work? Because I don't know. I have a sneaking feeling we're going to see Knicks Pacers again, obviously in the regular season, but maybe even in the playoffs.
I hope so. I so hope so. I'm so excited. It's on ESPN, right? There's clearly anticipation. This will be awesome. I'll be talking about it over at Tony R. East on Twitter and on Locked On Pacers. You can hear the Pacers side of things. I'll probably do a podcast just for this game because it's going to be awesome.
All right, good stuff. All right, he's Tony East, Locked On Pacers, and Gavin Schall, Locked On Knicks. We'll talk to you soon on both pods.